once again, what a fantastic start to our workshop. And our goal now is to spend the time until 11:30 just discussing with our keynote presenters some of the questions and ideas that came forward as you were listening to them speak. So I have a set of questions, but I would prefer to get questions from you. So let's see if we can open it up for any questions from the group. Or from online. Okay, so yeah, okay, here's one. Okay, and if you can go to the microphone and say your name. So that, and the reason for saying your name is, again, this is being recorded and we would like the online people to be engaged in the discussion. So thank you for getting us started with the discussion.
Sorry, it might be a dystopian question. My name is Ulrike Passer. I'm an architect and I'm an associate professor at Iowa State University, where it's currently minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry.
How sustainable is that?
Well, my question relates to mentioning the Blade Runner 2049's storyline. And it's not really only about the flying cars. If you remember, the story starts with a data blackout. And I don't want to start this off, but now I'm the first one asking a question. So how can we prevent these types of dystopian views on data and on managing our society with all this information, modeling and predicting and analyzing? How can we secure that infrastructure?
That's a great question. Jean, I see that you're ready to answer.
Sure. Well, I think it's a really insightful question, actually, because so we just came out of a government shutdown. One of the projects I formerly worked on, data.gov, was shuttered during this time. So the website was turned off. It happened earlier in the 2013 shutdown as well. And we have to think about the fact that even when we look at large institutions like the government, who should be open all the time, personal opinion, that we need to figure out if businesses are building on the data, if academic researchers are using that data, if data journalists are constantly pulling that data, then how do we make sure that that data is accessible and available at all times to the people who need it, and that we understand the provenance of that data as well. Right, it's not, we were just at the break, we were just talking about how there really isn't any perfect data out there. Everybody's data is a little imperfect, and that's okay. But in that idea, how do we be able to model and work on that? I think a lot of these challenges show up for climate scientists when we're looking at really complex ecosystems like modeling an environment or the world or an ocean, for goodness sake. And as we start to do that modeling, there's so many assumptions, inferences, implications that come into play. So I think there's a couple of layers to your question. One is like just the data. How do we make sure it's always accessible and available? And I think that there are sort of challenges to that. The second one is how do we understand the way that people are modeling on that and the inferences and implications and intentional and unintentional biases that are introduced into those models. I don't have a great answer, but I think it's a great question.
So let me, let me actually maybe throw a little bit in here as well. So one of the efforts that I've been taking on under the Kinder Institute that Bill heads up is to create what we're calling the Urban Data Platform. And basically it's a library of all data about the Houston area that we can assimilate. And so it's not only that the current data is available, but we want our history to remain available as well. And so archiving our data and really the data provenance issue, those are equally as important as the real-time data. And so I think that we're going to see more of this. And, you'd like to be able to ride the tide over the cool mayor syndrome, I guess. And but there's also, and so this is, again, maybe an opportunity for a academic city government partnership where that is very important. But data security and data access is definitely top on everyone's mind, I think. So.
Yeah, so one thing I'd just like to add a little bit is in some scientific endeavors, we have been able to do a little bit better with the data or how we handle the data. Such as, so if you think about climate and you're talking about that, Gene. So the IPCC uses these coupled modeling intercomparison project data. So it's modeling groups, by now about 40 odd modeling groups across the world. They build their models and they run, and these are enormously complex models, so they run this in some coordinated mode. And then there's archived somewhere. So in this country, Lawrence Livermore archives that. There are, others, other institutions. So there have been people such as Cynthia Rosenzweig and others who have been talking about, urban, similar to IPCC sort of urban assessment reports. So as part of that, as part of the 400 mayors, is there something we can do which takes what you're talking about, Kathy, in terms of, here's what we're doing for this particular city, which is important, but then maybe across cities, network of cities, we can make some of these data sets available. Some like weather, climate, those kind of data sets, there are no issues sharing some of them. Some of them, even there are issues in sharing or confidentiality issues. We might start to think about how to anonymize data, how to use the same kind of methods that, let's say, the private sector has been using in other areas, and bring those kind of things here. Oh, okay, we have a session.
Yeah, we have a session on the privacy of data and the privatization of data, and which we will be talking about some of the state-of-the-art opportunities there as well. So yeah. We have another question? Okay, great. Oh, and over here. Okay, so please, maybe over here first, please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. First, let me thank the Academy staff and the committee, of course, for bringing us a great stimulating discussion so far. My name is Jerry Miller. I'm president of Science for Decisions, which is a small consulting practice here in DC. But perhaps more importantly, I used to be on the Academy staff, and I directed the program in Science and Technology for Sustainability here in this room. I mentioned to a couple of folks during the break that there was a report on urban sustainability that was produced a couple of years ago. And our biggest challenge in looking at, I think it was 11 cities as case studies, was lack of access to data. In some cases, data were simply never collected on parameters that our study committee thought were important. In other cases, data were available, but as we've already heard, accessibility and applicability to sort of the operational demands within a city structure was a big challenge. About the time I was stepping down from my role here at the academies, I had spun up a new activity with colleagues in Europe, looking more broadly at urban issues around the world. And eventually we created a project that we now call The World in 2050, looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking for data and information pertinent to those goals, and in particular in the urban setting. We look at this 2050 time horizon rather than 2030, which is what the Sustainable Development Goals are aimed towards, because we realize that cities, nations, industries, et cetera, can contort themselves in various ways to kind of artificially hit one or two goals by an arbitrary deadline and come out on the other side of that time horizon on a totally unsustainable trajectory. So the question that I have for the panel is, given what you see from data which are currently available on issues and parameters that are pertinent to operations in the urban setting, what do you think of the trajectories that we're currently on, and how can we develop data pipelines that will support decision-making going decades into the future?
Well, since everybody's looking at me, I'll try to answer the question. I think it goes back to one thing Gene said and a point I made. Gene said we've got sensors everywhere. You know, and so I think it goes back to the question of measuring the right thing and making sure you have the data on the right thing. Just because we have sensors everywhere doesn't mean gathering and analyzing all of that data is valuable, right? So again, I think that you have to be more strategic about, you have to be very strategic about what of the Eurowashian data, which of this data is valuable, which of it gets to your goals. So it goes back to the goals. So as I said, from a sustainability point of view, cities often measure the wrong thing. From an ops point of view, they're measuring the right thing, right? My job is to pave the streets, therefore, 100 miles is better than 90 miles, right? From a sustainability point of view, that may not be the case, but from my ops point of view, it is. So I think the game is to figure out, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the metrics? And then in this endless amount of data we now potentially have access to, which data streams are the ones which measure most accurately progress toward the goals? That's what I would say.
And I'll just kind of I think Bill's right on. Part of the challenge too is motivating cities to act and motivating cities to share. So each city is going to have its own slightly different motivation. What we decided to do in Los Angeles to deal with that very issue around urban sustainability is we have 2 strategic plans that are action-oriented, each of which have about 100 actions in them. One is our sustainability plan, which looks at environment and equity issues. And then the other one is our resiliency plan, and that deals more with like stresses and disasters kinds of things. A lot of cities have strategic plans, so those alone are not enough to act. So the mayor actually, in landing the 2028 Olympics, used that as a motivating factor. So most departments have a 28 by 28 agenda, so 28 major projects. We then connected that with our UN Sustainable Development Goals so that it becomes a data-driven exercise. So it doesn't work for everybody because not everybody's going to have the Olympics, but but for us that was like a stretch goal because the city departments are motivated to act upon getting ready for having all of those visitors come to Los Angeles. But every city has something. Every city has something that they're working towards, whether it's a 2050 goal or something else. And I think it's important to kind of connect that in. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned, so I just want to kind of explicitly mention, is partnerships with philanthropic organizations. So the work we're doing on the Sustainable Development Goals is actually funded by the Hilton Foundation, who's been an amazing sponsor and helping us to lift up that work. And then the Toyota Mobility Foundation, who wanted to be here but couldn't be here today, has been an amazing sponsor in some work we're doing with our Data Science Federation, and now is a huge new grant around traffic safety. And so we're using some of these really ancient sensors, so like these ancient traffic cameras at intersections that really are there to look at like accidents. We're able to use those crappy old cameras and use computer vision and machine learning to identify the number of pedestrians, bicyclists, and people in wheelchairs at intersections. And we have an automated traffic light system, so we're able to connect that in and be able to give people more time to cross the street when they need to, or give cars more free-flowing when there's no pedestrians around. So the idea of philanthropic organizations helping to actualize research in a city space is a huge opportunity for us. And I think often, as data scientists and researchers and statisticians, we don't really think about that so much as because we always think of going to grants.gov or other places for funding. And I think that that's an opportunity for us.
So just to follow up before we go to our next speaker, but Jean, how do you, so when a philanthropic organization steps in and you initiate a program, how is that program sustainable once they step out?
So we work with city departments. Not every city department is going to step up to every challenge, and some departments are a lot more first adopters than others. But our Department of Transportation is amazing, led by this wonderful woman, Salita Reynolds, who oversees the National Association of Chief Transportation Officers. So Salita in our transportation area is really a very forward-looking organization. What we try to do is help every city department figure out that long-term objective, whether it's street services that paves the roads, and they're talking about, we do programs in cool pavement, which decreases the temperature around cool paved streets by 10 degrees. So in urban heat islands, that's a really important intervention. Or whether it's, rec and parks and talking about tree planting. So what we try to do is build in sustainable ways through the budget process at the city, working closely with our Deputy Mayor over Budgets and Innovation to talk about these programs so that we can make sure that people are staffed and funded to make these work into the future.
So in Bill's scenario where you're building it into the fabric so it will survive the cool mayor syndrome, do you feel like that you're able to accomplish that?
Well, I think you got to accept to some extent that like I said, that the managers of a city typically are budget driven, and so therefore you got to show that there is a return on investment that will help, right? So the example I gave to somebody on the break is, if you can do predictive analytics that allows you to deploy your emergency vehicles or your fire or your police more efficiently and get you more, then that will get their attention. On a purely ops basis, that will get their attention. Like Jean said, if you have a different set of goals, for example, sustainability or resilience, the mayor, no matter who the mayor is, the mayor may lay that out as a goal. Departments will vary in their willingness and excitement to go along with that, right?
Hi, I'm Justin Smith. I'm a data scientist at the at the U.S. Census Bureau. So I think aspects of this question have been addressed, which is how do we get smaller cities, I'm particularly thinking maybe under 100,000 people, to invest in data and data science. We've talked about the value of using data, but is anyone or any group going out there and actually trying to convince them and get boots on the ground to do data work? Thank you.
Well, I think there are some situations where you compare, where you happen to have a large university in a small city, that where this is helpful. So speaking of mayors running for president, Mayor Pete from South Bend has done a good job of, a very small city has done a good job of partnering with Notre Dame, a very big university, to improve the data science, the data analytics for the city of South Bend. I think Jean might want to talk about what we were talking about at the break about your data federation and SCAG. But before she does that, I want to set that up by saying I do think that the metropolitan planning organizations and councils of government, the regional planning agencies, which often actually in their governance structure, smaller cities are overrepresented. These entities exist primarily to do transportation planning under federal law, but they do lots of other things, and I think they are a potential vehicle to pool resources and make the stuff available. Did you want to talk about?
Sure. So as somebody pointed out, in Los Angeles County, there are 88 cities, LA being sort of the big one, but there are 88 cities. And so we partnered with our Southern California Association of Governments after our first year when we realized the Data Science Federation was doing a good job for our city. And we realized because our universities that we partner with are all over the place, like we were kind of like taking too much just to ourselves. So we opened it up to the other 88 cities. So this year, for the first year, we have 4 or 5 different cities, including SCAG, which is the Southern California Association of Governments itself, as having Data Science Federation projects. And I expect that number to grow pretty dramatically in the next year. So in that way, a city that has some extra resources and maybe has that ability to invest in data scientists can actually kind of share the wealth. And in this case, those students, I don't really care which government. Wait, this is public. I don't really care which government they go to work for. I just want them to go and be of service to their community. So I think that's important. And then there's also other kinds of organizations like MIX, which is the Metropolitan Information Exchange, and that's for governments around 100,000, right around there. So they work with the city CIOs and others to help make that connection. Code for America is an organization that really cuts across all of our communities. I want to give a huge shout out to the Fuse organization for Fuse Fellows, who are provided to your city governments at a pretty reasonable cost to come in and make a big difference. We've got 9 Fuse Fellows this year. We're very greedy about our Fuse Fellows. There's a lot of organizations that try to do some of this bridging. There's others in addition to Fuse and Mix, but I think that you can find some of these opportunities where you can bring fellows in to help lift up the sort of data literacy of your managers. And then I'm just going to give you a shout out back, Justin, is that the Census Bureau is like the best in the world at like data anonymization and data management. And I think the federal agencies representing here in this Academy meeting really can reach out to cities and organizations to help them get a little more data literate.
Yeah, Roland Gamache, I'm actually more in public health by training. So my question is on this partnership with universities that you're talking about, and a follow-up to all the questions that have been asked so far, I think, is how to do, the jurisdiction ends, but that's really not where the problems end. So how does the university act to broker those partnerships with other cities and other communities outside the jurisdiction? Is that important when you're talking about these partnerships? And in particular, when we have different parties in charge of like county or the city or the next jurisdiction, what are those places we do? You talk about transportation already being one of those places where those particular departments may be able to interact in a way that doesn't really go against those jurisdiction lines. But are there other avenues like that you could want to discuss a little bit more?
So, do you want? Go ahead. Right. So there are a couple of things here that just wanted to mention. So Jean talked about students, communities, and these things. So first of all, there are some organizations such as the Thriving Earth Exchange of American Geophysical Union, which are exactly trying to do things of this nature, trying to put stakeholders in smaller cities who may not immediately at least have the kind of resources with researchers. One other thing I wanted to highlight, or a set of things, first of all, there are data sets sometimes available out in the open, which they are not recognizable as data that can help solve issues that are of importance or interest to cities, but sometimes they are. So there could be a whole lot of, data scraping, web mining kind of things that you could use to get interesting data sets, and we have some examples of that. That's another discussion. Sensors are getting cheaper, of course, and low power, and that's another thing. And at Northeastern, for example, through some institutes that we have, and this is true across many other universities. So you have a Global Resilience Institute headed up by Stephen Flynn, who was in President Obama's transition team in resilience, and there is the BARI, the Boston Area Research Initiative, which is cross-university, which is trying to do some of these things. One other point I wanted to mention, I was in a very different workshop a few months back. This was in KDD, Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining, which is one of the top conferences in computer science, in these data science, big data, machine learning kind of areas. And computer scientists go by their conferences even more than journals. We had a workshop where the question that was being asked was, there are all these students and all these faculty who are interested in solving the kind of problems, Jean and Bill, that you are talking about. But they are saying, if we don't understand this, but we want to solve, are there things that are organized in some fashion for us? So are there some challenge problems? Are there some, here are these set of metrics, here is this data, and somebody has taken a first look, and here is what we can do to a first order. Can you improve on that? So they're used to looking at these problems, at least initially, in a certain way. And do we have problems in sustainability broadly and problems for cities in that way? If not, what can be done to help address that gap? Because once we do, there are many people waiting to solve these problems, which is the other side of the thing.
So sort of like a Kaggle for sustainability. It's a Kaggle competition for sustainability. I think this would be a good point I just want to jump in and make the point that, in research, we've really moved toward this transparency and reproducibility. And so I would just want to sort of hit home again that, we do need to understand what data drives our decisions and be able to follow that chain of information. And so it's not just grabbing data for one-off solutions, but building the infrastructure that allows us for that transparency and reproducibility in our decision process. So any more comments before we move to the next question?
I was just going to kind of add on to something Arup said, which is, so there's standards organizations as well. I'm sure you're all familiar with ISO and the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. And so with the W3C, we worked with Google and Bing and a lot of the other search engines to be able to create a new schema that just got launched last year around data. So you can actually search directly in Google looking for file types of data to be able to pull that data, only data sources, as opposed to kind of the brute force way that we used to search for data or trying to find aggregators like data.gov. So I think there's a lot of sort of infrastructure, kind of behind the scenes stuff that's going on that is making it easier for people to be able to find data from which they can build these kinds of decisions.
Good morning. My name is Fred Abulzelman. I actually represent a council of governments, and usually I have to pay somebody on a panel to even talk about them because it's completely unsolicited.
Well, we can talk about that later.
Absolutely.
So you can thank Cynthia and George Mitchell.
So actually, I'm also the former executive director of the National Association of Regional Councils, so I did represent almost 400 of these regional planning organizations, SCAG being one, the Metropolitan Council in Boston, South Bend being another. So this is, I think, a great introduction to what larger scale cross-jurisdictional, multi-jurisdictional planning organizations can do. But the question is, I now work and direct a much smaller one. Our population footprint is 270,000 people. I used to be here in DC. So one of the questions I have is, how do we, I think we have to rise up and grab this information from what's happening at this level, but how do we push it down? And I understand some of the comments is having a champion or maybe a university, but it's not always that easy. I have tons of data that my agency both produces and has access to, so it's not a data question for us. I don't even think it's a resource question. It's both an excitement of what we do with it, and there's a fear of then the cost, which I don't think is actually astronomical, especially in a smaller region. And we were talking earlier about how $50 in my region can drive more change than maybe $1 million in Los Angeles. So I'd like to know a little bit about how do we push this down, and this goes about, I think, to what Justin was saying. How do we push it down so it's more accessible, both nationwide and maybe at the state level and at the regional level, so that my mayors and county commissioners and others don't fear it, understand it, and can get excited about it, but make it easier for us, and especially in smaller places, to have access. And I think one of the things that I'm finding is everybody's doing it differently, which makes it harder for me to figure out the path forward to make it sustainable. So thank you.
What's the cog you run? Where is it?
Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I have a better answer to this than you would, but I think you raised a good point at the end, something I meant to say in my presentation. When you go around, the fact that everyone's still trying to figure out how to do this in a pretty consistent way is a hindrance at the moment. When I go to meetings like this or NSF meetings on similar topics, sometimes I think, I like to say, I feel like I'm in Silicon Valley in 1970 or maybe Detroit in 1895, right? Everybody is in their garage trying to figure this out their own way, right? And I think over time, you will see more standardized ways of doing things that will make doing things cheaper, which will make it easier for smaller cogs such as yours to do this. That said, it seems to me, again, the best approach is for a smaller jurisdiction and I understand, for a smaller region, and I understand your point, having spent 25 years in Ventura County, California, you got to leverage whatever you got and whatever in terms of the government, university and research capacity and philanthropy, whatever you got. And different regions will have different capabilities there. Maybe you've got a community foundation that has some donors that are interested in this, right? Maybe you've got a state college that is not research oriented but has some people who are interested in this. I think you just kind of got to figure out what assets you have locally and figure out how to leverage them as much as you can. And I think the other point you made was that everybody's afraid of the cost. Is that what people are afraid of? Right? Everybody's afraid of the cost, and how do you maintain this over time, I assume, is part of the issue. But I go back to what Gene said, which is that if you pool the cost, A, the cost isn't as much as you might think. B, there's a return on it. And C, if you pool the cost across the whole cog, maybe it's not that much.
And I think one of the things we've done too is for our Data Science Federation, we had to show, because we're very, as large as Los Angeles is, there's a lot of reasons for budget to go in lots of different places. So we had to show sort of the tangible cost benefit to the city for continuing to manage this. It only takes a half a person on my staff to be able to kind of oversee the effort. It's not a huge lift, but it does take kind of the right mix of sort of collaborative ideas and a very, 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 very cool mayor to help push this forward. But part of it too, I think, is the idea of how are we going to show the return on investment so that in any city government they understand that a small investment up front with a partnership like with a university can really change the whole dynamic around something where we're finding sunk costs. So I won't touch the pension issue because that's sort of almost past the ability for data science, but I will touch on homelessness. So homelessness is a huge issue for Los Angeles, but it's also a huge issue for 60 other cities in the United States. And so what we're looking at is not just how to house people at the end. Like, we have a lot of solutions around that, and there's a lot of cost to those solutions. But instead we said, well, what if we switch it around? What if we can stop somebody from ever becoming homeless? And so using predictive analytics and risk factors, we're able to actually look at somebody's characteristics and say, they're a veteran, they had sexual abuse, they have a sick child in the house, they live in a certain area. So some of this we know, some of this we can infer when they first come in to get like workforce training at a county or city place. And so we can ask a few questions and understand we need to offer them additional services now as opposed to waiting till they become homeless. So we have like rent subsidies we can offer. So we can help them for 3 months to be able to meet their rent while they're transitioning to a new job. Or we can get them covered under the ACA and Covered California if they have a sick child, because often healthcare costs are the issues. Somebody here was in healthcare. Healthcare costs are the issue that cause a family to go into homelessness. And if we can keep that family from ever becoming homeless in the first place, the return on investment for that one Data Science Federation project was amazing. We also did one around tax audits, like which businesses to audit. Maybe not the most super sexy project we've ever done, but it was the best ROI we ever had. And so, you know, our chief financial officer is now super happy with the work that we're doing because we're showing we can actually cause a huge amount of savings to what we thought were sunk city costs by doing data science approaches.
And I'll say from the academic side, we're turning out a lot of data scientists, and so we're getting a population that will be very well educated and hopefully educated correctly. Fingers crossed. But let's get okay. Yeah. Okay.
One other point there is, sometimes we think that from the academic side there is no real incentive to work. I mean, from some academic institutes, especially if they want to be or are research intensive, there's no real incentive. That's not true at all, by the way. I mean, these days we are increasingly, evaluated. Even if you ignore the fact that many of us are actually interested in solving problems that matter, even if you ignore that, the incentive structures in academia, in research these days are one aspect of that is the impact and the footprint. So this is a conversation waiting to happen. There are people, and of course many of our students are enormously motivated, and I think many of you hinted that, to work in these areas. So even if you pick one problem, that here is the data, and as you're saying, how to push this thing down, what kind of thing is actionable? Here's one problem, and let's begin to think about this, but that's a conversation. It's not going to happen immediately. So if I solve some data problem without talking to you, I'll solve a problem that nobody needs, and vice versa. So, but once this conversation happens, there is a lot of interest on both sides.
Okay, over here, you've been waiting very patiently, so.
Hello, my name is Chibuzo Okoro. I'm a master's student at Georgetown University. So this question is from Jean's presentation, but the question can be for the entire panel, in which you mentioned the use of citizen scientists to create engagement just from the communities. So I know like there's different ways, such as the Waze app, in which like regular people can engage in data gathering just through a smartphone. And you also mentioned the, I forget the name, but the augmented reality app for children. So my question is, what are some incentives for communities rather than institutions to create more engagement for data gathering?
I think that communities have amazing citizen science opportunities. There's, so a few years ago, we published a federal citizen science and crowdsourcing toolkit. So that's available, I think, off the GSA website, Federal Citizen Science Toolkit. And it worked at trying to connect these citizen science efforts. So like the most traditional one being like bird watching, okay? So right, going out and seeing like where different populations of birds are. Being able to connect that to our scientific research in a rigorous enough way that the scientists could actually use and adopt that data, and then being able to make it usable enough from the citizen scientist perspective that it's not onerous. So for example, in California, we have these beautiful golden monarch butterflies. It's normally this huge population that goes up and down the coast into Baja California. But we've been seeing, because of citizen science efforts, we have seen a decline of 90% in the last 2 years in that population of butterflies. So although, you know, these are very specific kinds of things, what we want to do is be able to realize that, you know, from the science community, we're not collecting all the data ourselves. We want to be able to activate citizen scientists who are passionate about butterflies or birds or, you know, finding things in the parks or whatever that ocean safety and pollution issues. To be able to figure out a way to gather that actual data as opposed to just their passion and convert it into ways that help our scientific community and our governments be able to take action on those. So I think there's a lot going on, and there's different activities, but that Federal Citizen Scientist Toolkit's a great way to get started.
Yeah, and I will add that in the broader data science statistics community, there has been a long conversation about how to integrate this sort of haphazard information with more measured information. And so, you know, taking into account the sampling biases that might be present. And so those scientific questions are part of the science vernacular now, which is great. I think Beth, where you've been waiting over there, so.
Yeah. So my name is Beth Zittler, but I'm actually bringing a question from Brian Wee, who's participating online. He says, given what Bill Fulton said about the state of likely long-term fiscal austerity at the municipal level and the shortage of capacity to use various tools and models to inform decisions, and he says, for example, how do you figure out who to partner with at local universities? He wants to know, how can cities ameliorate this bottleneck by providing exemplars of how other cities have used data-driven approaches for a given problem? For example, how can you drive the reuse of traceable data-driven solutions, possibly by imagining a diagrammatic workflow, where one could click on a start of data and end up at decisions and show how the workings happen in an individual city to learn for other cities?
Well, I think that shared learning about this is really important. That's part of the reason why I got involved with Metro Lab Network. And in fact, on the Metro Lab Network website, again, as I said, that is a national organization of the partnerships between cities and universities. On the Metro Lab Network website there are a series of use cases how universities and cities work together to solve a problem. So I think that one of the things that we can do, and also that local government organizations nationwide can do, such as the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities can do, is identify those successful use cases and publicize them and create more of a learning community so that I in Houston know what successes Gene's having in Los Angeles, et cetera.
Anita Skutta. I thought the three of you really set it up fantastically. And as I said before, me and my organization work about 100 cities, but all of them are in the global south, none of the United States. So my questions are very much from that experience. One thing that was striking to me, all three of you said something absolutely music to my ear, this partnership with academics or universities and cities, which is, I think, critical for this area. Arup pointed out how emergent the sciences, things are happening. So very few city gets to hire a UCLA professor to come actually work on the city in the data department. I mean, that's a gift. So this partnership I'm not seeing, which I think is critical for this area to emergent science to actually work and figure out what to do. I'm at least not seeing in the cities I work in. So the question I have is, what are we learning from here, this community, about this partnership that works, how it works, and how we can bring some of these lessons to the global south? That's my first question. And my second question is very interrelated. I love, Bill, what you said about cool mayors and small cities. Most people in the world actually now and in the future will live in smaller cities, not the mega cities in the world. The 2.5 billion people I talked about, most of them actually will not go to mega cities, will actually be growing in smaller cities. And a lot of these smaller cities and a lot of cities in Global South actually don't have the capability that we're talking about, right? And I like the political point you made that it's very difficult to make the political case for this capability. So again, the question is, what can we do, or what are we learning here to make the political point to bring this capability or the effectiveness of the science to the city decision-making that we are facing?
Again, everybody's looking at me. I'm not sure I have a good answer for the Global South, not being an expert in that. I can only speak to my experience in U.S. cities, which are very budget-driven and in budget difficulty a lot of the time. One thing I didn't talk about to your first question, one of the things I didn't talk about was the impediments that you see in academia to these kind of partnerships, which I encounter and deal with every day. And I think that it is fair to say that in at least in a traditional university setting, there aren't very many incentives for tenured faculty or tenure track faculty to do this stuff, right? The typical response, I mean, the kind of work that Kathy's been doing for the Kinder Institute is truly remarkable and not really in her job description. But you know, the bottom line for most tenure track professors is, okay, how do I get research money? How do I hire graduate students? And how do I write journal articles, right? And so I go to them and I say, well, you know, I can't really help you with any of that stuff, but you can make an impact in the real world. And so that's entirely up to the motivation of individual faculty members. And of course, a university is not hierarchical like a government agency is, where the president of the university says we're going to do this and everybody does it. That's not going to happen, right? So I think there are significant impediments on the university side as well to these partnerships, which have to be respected as part of the landscape as well, just as I described what the municipal governments deal with.
So a couple of things here based on at least what I've seen. So I mean, as I was saying, I'd fully agree with what Bill is saying about the lack of incentive structures in universities, but there could be creative ways to create those. So I mean, I was part of a very large NSF-funded project called Expeditions in Computing, dealing with climate change science and its impacts. And this work for Brookline that we did, this particular work was unfunded. But when I talked to my NSF program manager that this is something I want to do, I want to ask one of or a few of our graduate students who are working in NSF to see if we can address some of these. And she loved that idea. And that is part of the impact side. So there could be creative ways to do this. Now, getting back to your question, though, about Global South, and I mean, you're an expert, I'm not. But some of the things that we have seen, so I'll just give a couple of examples. As I was telling you during the break, I have this program where I take some students, very sharp and motivated undergraduate students, together with one or two of my PhD students as co-instructors to various parts of the emerging or developing economies, spend a month and try to learn things related to climate and cities and things of that nature. So one interesting example we learned while we were in Jakarta. And they were trying to build this huge seawall. Jakarta obviously has a flooding problem. It's one of the, probably the flooding capital, if you will, in a sense of the word. And they were trying to build this huge seawall shaped in the form of the mythical bird called Garuda. And they're partnering with the Dutch, and the Dutch, as many of us are aware, are the leading experts in the world on resilience. So here you have the leading experts in the world on resilience, and here you have, they're trying to do something for Jakarta. Obviously there is money involved and so on, that's fine, but trying to do something, and it's this huge seawall. Turned out though, that just that physical infrastructure was not the only thing, or maybe the first thing that you should build. There are various socioeconomic issues that needs to be solved. There are various educational things, how in kampungs, which are the either the villages or the sort of communities of slums there, how they react, the education level, what motivates them to not throw their trash in the rivers. And there are ways, they have actually done some things. So there are various socio-political issues. There is the total water management for the entire basin, as opposed to this solution of, okay, here's this physical infrastructure that I need to put in it to solve all problems. Even though some of it, the combination of physical infrastructures and natural systems, may have solved this problem for the Dutch. So there is this issue of understanding the technology, but making it contextual. And one thing that we have seen in Mumbai then, for example, they have IIT Bombay, one of the top institutes, and one of the things I was trying to work with some faculty there is in Mumbai there is, there's the river called Mithi River, which is polluted to the extreme, and it should be a lifeline of the city. It's really, fairly unsustainable trying to do something there. And they face various mundane issues, trying to install sensors, and if they're costly sensors, in slums, people don't often see that this is ultimately long-term for the benefit of me and my children and grandchildren. They just take those away because they sell it for scraps. Then I went to Kolkata, which is another city, and I was talking to the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and they said, okay, we could solve this particular problem by talking to some local people and explaining why this is useful to them. So many of the solutions, some of the technology things that we have here could be useful, but they have to be put in the context of that thing. And I was talking about frugal innovation. So, many of these emerging economies, because they have to do things in a resource-constrained way, they try to do that. Some of them are not so good, but some of them are good. And one of the glorious examples that people give is the fact that, the cost of India's Mars mission was less than the production cost of the movie Gravity. Now, there are various caveats to that. But, there are things locally in terms of societal resilience, in terms of what is useful that, if we put those kind of things into context and then try to use technological benefits, there are potential things could be done. So that's just a...
Great, let's move.
If I could, I just want to add one 30-second addition. So I've worked extensively in Africa and the Middle East, actually doing some of this work in the global South, if you want to call the Middle East South. And so work with the White House and then the World Bank, and then I have a startup in Kenya, actually. So we work with local governments to help open up data, create open data portals, which can be difficult at times, but at least as a start. And we partnered them with the local universities. We were able to train over 3,000 youth in new technologies and new capabilities. And the trick for the work we did in Uganda, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana was really around the idea of getting data journalists. So journalists, often not data journalists when we started with them, and teaching them how to use data in ways that help to inform their community in understandable stories that will help drive change in their community. And so the idea of connecting, so this isn't the first time I've tried to connect government with universities, but it's really important, particularly in Africa, to be able to do that because it's such an amazing infrastructure that's often sort of unrecognized, and being able to kind of lift those up with the government in a way that actually creates transparency.
Thank you, Jean. Over here.
Thank you. I'm Dave Rabinowitz, and there are a lot of cities with universities locally with students who want to do projects in data analysis. And so there are a lot of wheels being reinvented all over the place. Students come up with a project which looks very good and does a great job and is totally unsustainable once the student leaves. And managers like turnkey solutions where they don't have to worry about designing and sustaining it. They've got some support. Is there an industry that's doing this yet?
A great question.
That's a great question. As Kathy said, I think the answer is no.
A great opportunity.
That's a hint.
It's a great, it's a great opportunity,
Jean,
right?
get on
right.
that.
The students. Yeah, we're going to create a startup over lunch on that.
Sally.
So I'm Sally Keller from University of Virginia. And in the discussion about this university and community and local government partnership, there's something I think that hasn't been said. And if you're going to embark on working on the incredible things that you guys have all talked about, it just was chilling to, in a good way, to hear all of this. We have to recognize that to be successful, there's a pace at which the projects have to unfold. And the pace of the research, which is much more rapid than what typical academics and typical academic units can do. And I think that needs to be understood if we're talking about incentives and other sorts of things, is how do we create, whether it's units within our universities. I have a research division that's a full-time research division, so we're able to execute research at a faster pace and have slightly more success in some partnerships. The urban data platform that was developed was not developed, by a typical academic researcher pace. I think that's a real reality, because when we get that engagement started with our government partners, if we can't deliver, then it's just another academic that wasted my time. So I just want to be sure that we remember that.
I think that's really important. So, for example, our projects for the Data Science Federation have to be able to be understood, acted on, and completed within a 10 to 17-week semester or quarter. So we really focus and sometimes we get like a student coming to do a thesis for a longer period of time, but generally we're looking at 10 to 12 weeks. And so we really have to focus the department to what is doable in that time frame and what connects with what the students are already doing in their class. So maybe it's a Python or an R class, maybe it's Tableau, maybe it's public policy or health issues. So whatever professor comes forward with an idea, we match with the city department, but we have to make sure it's doable. And then sometimes we have the opportunity, like with Toyota Mobility Foundation, that is now currently a 3-year research project. So that lets us build up at one of our lesser-known universities, Cal State LA, which suffers from one of our highest homeless populations of students in Los Angeles. So it's great to be able to build up that research program there around mobility and safety over a 3-year period of time.
Okay, we're coming to an end. I think we have time for just a couple of more questions. Over here, please.
Thank you. Deborah Goodings from George Mason University. So there are many parts to this problem that you are putting your fingers on. And one part is about having data repositories. So Los Angeles certainly has made large strides in this. And the previous questioner made reference to the urban data platform, which I think is the European platform. If we are looking for a large repository where many cities can dump their data, which would be accepted, curated, if necessary, anonymized, and then made available to people who wanted to use that, it would need to be some organization which was neutral and had a long commitment to keeping it up. So that usually eliminates universities because faculty move around, lose interest, retire, whatever. A couple of names have come up, and I'm deeply interested in what kind of an organization might be a good host for this, even if it could have external funding. So is it, for example, the National League of Cities, or is it the overall Council of Governments? I'm interested in the panelists' feeling about what sort of an organization should be hosting something like that.
Well, I think Sally's reference to the Urban Data Platform, I think, was probably to the Urban Data Platform that Kathy built for us at Rice, which is a repository of data for the Houston region. The challenges that you identified are the challenges that we face in maintaining the Urban Data Platform over time. I think a university can be an appropriate repository if the university and its funders have a commitment to that repository as a piece of infrastructure, and it is not viewed as, you know, the province of some professor's research project, right?
But I'm interested in a national one. So
I
some
see.
universities
Okay.
are doing
I
wonderful
don't
work.
think that the National League of Cities or the U.S. Conference of Mayors would be would their advocacy and membership service organizations. I'm not sure. It almost seems like a federal role to me, frankly.
So I just want to point out that data.gov has a cities.data.gov component. So I'm not sure the current number since I'm not currently on that project. But we built it when I was still there, and we federate the data from open data portals across the country. So it's a way to be able to easily access data from those cities, and any city can submit it. Cities and federal agencies can also sponsor university data. So if you're working with the university, so say Census is working with the university, and they say the University of Maryland has authoritative data in this space, and we vouch for them, then data.gov will also accept that kind of data.
Thank you.
One other thing to just quickly add, just 30 seconds, is national labs have an interest in this problem. I was at Oak Ridge Lab for 7 years, so I know there's an interest. There's a little bit of they look at the funding sustainability model and what is the best way to do that for labs, which are very expensive in general because of various things they have to do, but that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that for the risk modeling community, natural catastrophe modeling community, they have this open access platform called OASIS, this for the NatCat model, natural catastrophe model. So that's another interesting thing to think, is that could something like that be built? And that's an industry that's becoming something that everybody in the industry wants to use now. So one is national labs from the sort of government institutionalized side, and one is more open access kind of thing that could be thought of.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that I think that the open data is definitely a way to go. But if we think about publishing data, like we think about publishing papers, so there's ownership and there's legitimacy behind sort of the data product that we're bringing forward. I think that's another direction that we want to make sure that we go. Let me take one more question, and then I have a question to kind of bring us back to the focus of the workshops.
Hi, this is Ulrike Passe again from Iowa State University. It's not actually a question, sorry. It's a contribution, I hope, to the discussion on small communities, smaller cities, and academia. There is a group of universities which I think should be really part of this conversation. It's those with the land-grant mission, because they actually are in every state, like Iowa State University, the first to sign on to the Morrill Act, and they have that capacity to be in every county of their state. Thank you.
I think we do have a representative in our group that works closely with the land grant. So the question that I would like to ask, so our conversation quickly kind of went toward the here and now, so how do we make now happen? But on a sustainability picture, we're looking, 20, 30 years out. How do we make now happen, as well as use what we're talking about in terms of data modeling and simulation for sustainability in 30 years? So is there any futuristic additional comments that the panel would like to make?
So I can maybe try and start that process, and then, Jean and Bill, you have to weigh in. I can start this process from the sense of, I was asked to do that when I don't think I was ready for that. And I think I speak for many in my community, which is broadly the climate impacts, climate adaptation community. So there is Don Webbles here. He can correct me, about this, but there was a time when from climate side we would say, if you're thinking about climate problems, climate is not weather, think about things 50 to 100 years later. That's when things become climate, and that's when, we have heard now again and again, I have heard personally and many of my colleagues, that is not going to work. So now we have to think of, like you are saying, 20, 30 years. And what happens there is that there are different types of plausible futures, different types of uncertainty, some because of our knowledge gap that actually increase as we go over time, but some because, some that reduce, relatively speaking, when you think of 50 to 100 years, but are significant in the scheme of things, irreducible uncertainty when you think of 20, 30 years. And, unfortunately, in the future, we don't have observations, so we have to deal with models, simulation exercises, and things of that nature. We can creatively use observations to gain insights, to get better with systematic evaluation. But we have to be able to look at plausible futures, an envelope of possibilities, and try to make ourselves resilient as much as we can to those. So I'll start off with that.
And I just want to sort of point to the power of predictive analytics. So the idea of what the future will be like is really based on our ability to understand our history and our present in a way that's going to manifest a future that we and the people who live in our cities want. So part of what we're really trying to understand is what data is going to best inform that model of the future. How do we gather that data? But also what kind of diverse voices are going to help us understand what that future could be. So I know you guys thought I was silly to show SimCity and Blade Runner, but good, somebody did think so. But the idea is that this creation of the future is not just a sort of extrapolation of the past. We have a hand in shaping that future. And so trying to bring diverse voices, different people with different ideas, youth and the elderly, people with different ethnicities and different genders to the table is really going to help us to shape a future, particularly in a city as diverse as Los Angeles, but in every city. And so what I really want to do is kind of think as we walk forward through these next few days, what kinds of opportunities are there to shape that future that you want to be part of, to be a future that you look forward to and not one which is dystopian, and that we really have all the tools available to us today. We just have to figure out which problems we're going to focus on and which are the most important priorities. And if I can leave you with one piece of information, if anything I said has inspired you, the city of Los Angeles is hiring. So lacity.org, we are desperately in need of data scientists, innovation experts, and people with great ideas.
Okay, so we're actually a little bit over time, so we'll have to sort of close the questions. I'm sorry. Okay, maybe. Okay, one more question. I'm sorry. Okay.
Just very quickly. I'm Don Wubbles. I was one of the leaders in the U.S. National Climate Assessment. I'm at the University of Illinois. Just following up on what Roop said very quickly, I think we're all concerned about what we could say about the next 10, 20, 30 years. We understand that importance. But it also does bring about different uncertainties in the science that we do lay out in the National Climate Assessment, and particularly the importance in the early period of understanding the relevance of natural variability, and that has something that there has been a lot of effort in. Now we also recognize the importance of the need to translate the science into action and the development of new tools that can help us do that, and many of us in the community are quite concerned about that. Including work I'm doing at the University of Illinois in developing a new Center for Urban Resilience and Environmental Sustainability.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was worth getting in. So we are a little bit over time into our lunch. I would maybe, Beth, are you? What do you think? 12:35 or?
I think we can get started back on time.
Get started back on time at 12:30. Okay, so lunch is available for everyone. You can eat in this room, you can eat out in the foyer, and then on the third floor, there's actually, where there's a cafeteria, there's actually tables where you can sit down. So let's reconvene at 12:30 and with our first panel on modeling, simulation, and data. So.